The Korean State Railway is the operating arm of the Ministry of Railways of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and has its headquarters at Pyongyang. The current Minister of Railways is Chon Kil-su, who has held the position since 2009. The railway lines of North Korea were originally built during the Japanese occupation of Korea by the Chosun Government Railway, the South Manchuria Railway, and various privately owned railway companies such as the Chosun Railway. The Pacific War had left Korea's railways massively damaged. However, reconstruction work began immediately after the partition of Korea, and by 1948, when the People's Democratic Republic of Korea and the Korean State Railway was established, 3,767 kilometers of railway was in functional condition, including the restoration of the electrification on the Yangdŏk-Ch'ŏnsång section of the Pyongyang and the new electrification of the Kaegu-Koin section of the Manp'o Line. Other new construction took place prior to 1950, but the Korean War undid these gains, leaving North Korea's railway network devastated. Through the Korean War, much of the infrastructure and most locomotives were destroyed. With the aid of the Chinese People's Volunteer Corps, by the time of the ceasefire in July 1953, 1,382 kilometers of railway lines had been restored. Within 3 months after the armistice, 308 bridges with a total length of 15,000 m were either repaired or newly built by Railway Corps volunteers. 37 stations were rebuilt as the railway network was restored to its pre-war status. With extensive Soviet and Chinese assistance, the railways were rebuilt and further expanded. Large-scale electrification after the destruction of the Korean War began in 1958, and by 1973 over 1,300 kilometers of lines had been electrified, realizing the goal of electrifying all major trunk lines. By the end of the 1970s, the goal of eliminating steam power from the primary trunk lines had been achieved. In addition to the construction of new lines and electrification, the Railway Ministry also established various other railway-related undertakings, such as the Kim-Chong-tae Electric Locomotive Works, the Pyongyang Railway University, and rolling stock factories in Chongjin and Wonsan, etc. Since 1994, the economic difficulties have led to the deterioration of rolling stock and infrastructure, significantly reducing operational capacity and efficiency. In July 2000, talks began between the two Koreas to discuss the reopening of the former Kaegu-Koin line that once ran between Seoul and Sinraiju via Pyongyang. This line is now split between the Kaegu-Koin line in the north running from Sinraiju to Pyongyang, and the Manp'o Line from Pyongyang via Kisarenji to the Korean Demilitarized Zone, and Korail's Gyeonggi Line, which runs from the DMZ via Daresan to Seoul. Groundbreaking ceremonies took place in September 2002 for the reconstruction of this line, and the reconnection of the former Manp'o Line on the east coast, which is presently split between the North's Kamgangsan Chamgnai-ren line from Manp'o-ren on the Kangwa-ren line via Kamgangsan to the DMZ, and the southern section of the former Manp'o line from the DMZ to Jeojin. 2004 saw the worst-known railway disaster in North Korea, when an explosion at the station in Ryongch-ren destroyed buildings in a large swathe around the city station, killing 54 and injuring 1,245 people in the blast itself and the subsequent fires, according to official casualty reports. A wide area was reported to have been affected, with some airborne debris reportedly falling across the border in China. The Red Cross reported that 1,850 houses and buildings had been destroyed and another 6,350 had been damaged. The inter-Korean rail lines were finally reopened on 17 May 2007, nearly 7 years after negotiations on the subject began between North and South. An agreement on cross-border operations had been made between the Korean State Railway and Korail already in April 2004, but 3 subsequent attempts to run trains failed, until finally the military authorities on both sides adopted a security agreement on 11 May 2007, allowing the reopening of the lines on 17 May. The reopening consisted of 2 ceremonial trains, one over the Western Line from Munsan to Kisarenji, and another over the Eastern Line from Kamgangsan to Jejin. The Western train was operated from south to north by Korail locomotive and 5 coaches, while the Eastern train was pulled by Korean State Railway locomotive and 5 coaches. Each train carried 150 invited guests from the south and the north.